Hi, this is Rick Levine with your August astrology forecast, August 2020. And yes, we're still in the year 2020, although some people think that we're still in the month of March. It's been quite a year and it's quite a month coming up. Before we jump into the material, I just have a couple of very short announcements. Number one, I'd like to remind everyone that if you want to get my dailies, my daily Planet Pulse. It's kind of like a cross between a cosmic weather report and a daily blog about what's going on in the sky. That's available on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram at Rick Levine Astrologer, all one word, Rick Levine Astrologer on Instagram. And that's daily if and when you want to check in with what's going on in the cosmos day by day. And secondly, I would like to remind everyone that those of you who are not aware of a much wider offering of videos aside from this once a month astrology forecast, you can check out my page on Patreon. And Patreon is a platform that allows you to subscribe on a month-to-month basis. You can change your subscription. You can cancel at any point in time. But on patreon.com / Rick Levine, patreon.com / Rick Levine, you can find other video offerings, including my mid-month update, including occasional cosmic quickies where I just do short videos on a variety of astrological and related subjects. Or if you want to attend a monthly chart interpretation class live on Zoom, that's another level of joining. And then I have an apprentice program available only on an invitation basis. But if you're interested in any of those, go to patreon.com / Rick Levine. Check it out. And if you have any questions, always send me an email and I will respond. So with no further ado, let's take a look at August of 2020. Every month that comes up, I try to kind of capsulize the month in a feeling, in a sense. And every month has a slightly different flavor. Some months elude a capsulization because they're just too complicated. But as I began sinking into August of 2020, I realized a few things. Number one, we're certainly not out of retrograde territory yet. This has been a year for the record books with retrogrades, beginning with the Mercury retrograde hanging out around Neptune in Pisces back in March. And then in April, May, June, we had a series of Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn, each turning retrograde. Saturn having edged into Aquarius, now retrograded back into Capricorn. And then we had Venus turn retrograde. And right in the midst of all of that, we had Neptune turn retrograde and Mercury for another retrograde. And Mercury and Venus now have gone direct. They're clipping along pretty quickly. And this month, the only retrograde direct transition that we have is we have Uranus turning retrograde on August 15. And that's important because it just adds another little tinge of color to the retrograde energy. The most important thing, though, is that Venus and Mercury are now moving ahead, and they're moving ahead at a pretty good clip. And this defines, in some ways, this defines the month of August because there are no outer planet transits. And when I mean outer planet transits, what I mean by that is that transits between Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. There are no exact transits. There are no exact aspects between these outer planets. And yet there's a lot of inner planet noise now because when planets are turning from retrograde to direct, they slow down and they're not moving as quickly. Therefore, they don't make as many aspects or connections. But right now we have Mercury moving so quickly that Mercury, which had retrograded in Cancer and therefore was in Cancer for an extended period of time, Mercury enters Leo on August 4th. And Mercury is moving so quickly now that it moves into Leo on August 4th, and it leaves Leo entering Virgo on August 19th. When Mercury is moving along at a pretty good clip, it moves along at the rate of nearly 2 degrees every day, which means that Mercury whizzes through 30 degrees of Leo in like 2 weeks. And so it's going to be a flash in the pan. Mercury's really, really picked up speed now. Definitely the energy of communication, of intellectual interaction, of interchange, of the sending and receiving of information, of goods. That's all picking back up now. And we'll talk more about those Mercury aspects in a little bit. But just the sheer number of aspects that Mercury makes during the month is extensive because it's moving so quickly. And I should say here, and we'll look at this when we drill down in a couple of minutes, that we start the month off with a Mercury opposition to Pluto, and we end the month with a Mercury opposition to Neptune. And so there's a bit of awareness that is kicking around the sending and receiving of information, of the connecting of the dots that Mercury likes to do. And so this is very much a mercurial month, even though, of course, the sun is in the sign of Leo until the 22nd of the month, when the sun moves into Virgo. And so because Virgo is a sign that's related to Mercury, by the end of the month, we're really feeling that Mercury energy, but I'm suggesting that we feel it all the way through the month. Now, the other thing that is happening on the inner planets, because they're moving so quickly, is that Venus, which has picked up steam now, remember Venus was in Gemini, again, forever, for months, for nearly 4 months, I think. And on August 7th, Venus, which is still in Gemini at the beginning of August, on August 7th, Venus leaves Gemini and enters Cancer, where she will be for the rest of the month. But again, Venus, because it's moving forward now and picked up steam a little bit, picked up speed a little bit, it makes a number of significant aspects throughout the month. And here's the interesting thing. The quirky thing about the month of August is that it begins with Mercury opposing Pluto at 23 degrees of Cancer to about 23 degrees of Capricorn. And remember, Pluto is retrograding very, very slowly. And on the last day of the month, on August 30th, Venus is at 22 3/4 of a degree of Cancer, and Venus opposes Pluto at 22 degrees 46 minutes of Capricorn. So we begin the month and end the month with Mercury and Venus, respectively, making oppositions to deep, dark, powerful, what's the good word for Pluto here? The secrets are still coming out. We have a lot more to learn, and I think August will do some revealing, but we're still in a larger process that doesn't really begin to resolve until the Capricorn cluster, the clump of planets in Capricorn that now consist of the Saturn retrograde, the Jupiter, which has retrograded into Pluto, which is also retrograde. And so as the three of them begin to turn direct, that's when the energy will start clearing up and we'll be really moving into new territory. So there is some new territory this month, but the new territory is based upon the faster moving planets, not the slower ones. What does that mean? It means that this is a bit of a noisy month. In medical terminology, there's a difference between a chronic illness and an acute illness. Something that's chronic, coming from the word chronos, which is the origin of the word Saturn. Saturn is Latin for chronos, which is Greek. And Saturn, or chronos, has to do with the time that we measure. Chronos is like Father Time. And The chronic conditions that medically exist are ones that build up over a long period of time. When you have a chronic condition, you don't just take a quick cure and it's gone, because it's a long time coming. And if you're in a curative process, it can be a long time going. The flip side of that is an acute symptom or an acute illness, which may come out of nowhere. It flares up. It can be very intense for a short period of time, and then it goes away, hopefully. Now, it seems that with the speed of the inner planets, Mercury and Venus in particular, Mars still, but even Mars is beginning to slow down a little bit. It's not turning retrograde. Mars doesn't turn retrograde until next month. But Mars is already in that shadowy area where it's going to come back and cover again. So Mars is building intensity by slowing down. When a planet slows down, it becomes more chronos, it becomes more chronic. You remember, to the ancients, Saturn was the slowest moving of all the planets. It was really chronos. It was a chronic condition, was something that was related to Saturn. But we moderners have other chronic planets that move very, very slowly. But when an inner planet that normally moves fast, when it slows down, it also becomes more chronic, if you will. Here's the deal, though, about August. In August, we have a lot of static. We have a lot of noise. It's almost like there's too much noise going on from Mercury and Venus picking up energy, and we're overwhelmed by the details and the movement and the contrary stories and the chitter chatter. And this is all Mercury and Venus because they are both moving very quickly. And I think that the remedy for the entire month of August is to develop perspective and do whatever we can do to slow down. And what I mean by that is, whether it's a breathing technique or techniques, whether it's stretching or yoga or meditating, whether it's walking outside, whether it's reading, anything that can put you in a state of relaxation, I think is just helpful in gaining clarity, because we can get so caught up in the noise. Too much noise. So let's jump in and look at a few charts and see where the month takes us. It's going to be an interesting month. And again, I don't see a whole lot this month that can outweigh the intensity of the way this year has already been. But, everything that keeps coming just seems to bring another wave of, how the heck did we get here? Where the heck are we? And what are we going to do to get out of this? I do think, though, that there is a bit of newness here, because last month I noted that there was basically no inner planets changing signs. Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and for that matter, Jupiter, and even Saturn, none of these planets changed signs. This month, we have Mercury changing signs twice. Mercury moving from Cancer into Leo on August 4th, and from Leo into Virgo on August 19th. We have Venus moving from Gemini to Cancer on August 7th. And of course, we have the Sun, which changes signs every month toward the end of the month, middle end of the month, moving into Virgo. Each of these inner planets, though, that change signs shifts the landscape a little bit, and we will talk about that as we call up a chart. Let's look at a chart for the opening of the month on August 1st. Okay, so here we have a chart for August 1st, and this is a chart for noon in Seattle. So this is Pacific Daylight Time. Correct your time zone as needed. But we have here, as always, an Aries rising chart, because that shows the natural houses, so that the planets that are in Aries look like they're in the first house, and the planets in Taurus in the second, Gemini in the third, and so on. It's just a way of incorporating the entire globe, because there's no reason why we should use a chart for any one place, since people watching this are actually all over the world. So regardless of where you are on the planet, at noon time zone, at noon Pacific time, your time zone corrected, the moon will be at 17 degrees of Capricorn. For the record, I am recording this on Friday afternoon, July 31st, but on August 1st, we can see that the moon will be moving through Capricorn, and the moon moving through Capricorn is going to kick the month off with a bit of intensity. Normally, the Capricorn moon itself is not all that intense. I mean, it can be hard work and it can be difficult, but this moon, as the moon moves through Capricorn, is going to on August 1st, it's going to join up with Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, all in Capricorn. It's going to oppose Mercury in Cancer. It's going to, it already has, but it's going to, it already has squared Chiron, but it will square Mars. And so that moon is a very, very active moon. We are also just coming off of a Sun Chiron trine, although it was exact yesterday. That Sun trine Chiron is really still energizing us. There's a bit of healing energy, teaching energy. I think the key about Chiron, we often peg it simply as the wounded healer, but Chiron was also a teacher. Part of healing is in teaching. And as such, I think that when the sun forms a trine with Chiron, and this will linger for the first couple of days of August, it's almost like the teacher can be healed also. It's like there's role reversal, and that the healer is healing him or herself, and the person being healed is also actually doing some of the healing to the other person. So it's an interesting dynamic. Now, the other thing that occurs on the beginning of the month, August, which I mentioned earlier because it also is tied into a transit on the last day of the month, and that is that Mercury at 23 degrees of Cancer is opposing Pluto at 23 degrees of Capricorn. Mercury over the last couple of days opposed Jupiter, and then it opposes Pluto exactly on August 1st. But then it will oppose Saturn exactly on August 3rd. And so what this means is that when Mercury is in such oppositions, what it really means is that there's awareness that can come to us if we're willing to see the other side of the coin. This is something I've been harping on for many months now, but when Mercury is in opposition, especially to Pluto, because Pluto can be so powerful, there's this sense of subterfuge and of kind of hidden agendas. And yet when Pluto is in opposition to when Mercury is in opposition to Pluto, we can actually be confronted with information that challenges us in a way that we can then over-respond, and in some ways we can make the matter even worse. I think with the Mercury opposed to Pluto, opposing Pluto, it's important to use that as an opportunity to send the intellect, that would be Mercury, into the Plutonic hell realms, that would be the unconscious mind, into those places we fear. This is the Joseph Campbell, the cave you fear the most holds your greatest treasure. If we can detach our emotional clinging to those things that we believe are true or that we think is right, and we can simply open our awareness to perceive another side of an issue, that can then pay off down the road, even as early as August 3rd, when Mercury opposes Saturn and the hammer falls. Because when Mercury opposes Saturn, if we're wrong, we're going to know it. if we're running into a wall, remember Saturn is authority, and Pluto and Saturn together, and even tied to the Jupiter, because Mercury has opposed Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And we're going to see this as a theme during the month when planets will either oppose or square or trine or quincunx to the Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn in that order. First it hits Jupiter and we get a big idea. We think of all the hope. We think of the possibilities. We see where this can go. We get excited and enthusiastic. And then Pluto is brought in and we go, well, wait a minute. This is heavier than I thought it was. There's more going on. Our oppositions, our enemies, our nemesis, our nemeses are playing with more power than we had attributed. This is getting more serious. And then as Saturn is brought in, then the reality kind of settles in and we can figure out either how to work with it or how to be overwhelmed by it, pack up our bags and go home. It can work either way. So the opening of the month has this sense of this intellectual Mercury energy, even though Mercury is still in Cancer. Mercury is still in Cancer for a few days. It doesn't enter Leo until the 4th. It's moving very quickly now, as I stated earlier. But in Cancer, Mercury still isn't saying everything it knows. Mercury is still holding on to energy, and it's careful about what it brings out into the open. However, on August 2nd, the sun moving about a degree a day from Earth's point of view. We know the sun doesn't really move. It's the Earth moving a degree a day, but we map the planets as moving against the zodiac. The sun moving about a degree a day moves from 9 degrees of Leo, where it was trining Chiron at 9 degrees of Aries, to 10 degrees of Leo, where it is now squaring Uranus. This square to Uranus is significant because it also brings into being this half square that goes to Venus. And so you can see that Venus is about halfway between Uranus and the sun. Uranus, the planet of sudden, of unexpected, of excitement, of explosiveness, of releasing of energy. Uranus is the lightning planet, the electrical spark that goes, and it's the wake-up call. When Uranus strikes, it's like we know it because the lights go on. And when Uranus is squared by the sun, our vitality can get a wake-up call. We can get a sense of there's something new, there's something different. It can be shocking even. And with Venus halfway between the two of them forming a semi-square, 45-degree angle, a half square to Uranus on one side and the sun on the other, it may not feel all that pleasant. We may feel pulled in two different directions. We may feel a little bit scattered, and that Venus is going to stay in the picture over the next few days, and we'll see why in a few minutes. So that is the sun squaring Uranus on the 2nd. There can be some exciting shock, breakthrough, sudden, no matter how in tune we are or think we are with what's going on August 2nd, something can happen and we go, wow, I wasn't prepared for that. I can't believe he did that or she did that. I can't believe that happened. And that's a little bit of there's a shock involved with the sun squaring Uranus. But there's another piece of this that's coming into play, because as the moon, which on August 2nd moves into Aquarius, by the 3rd, that moon in Aquarius hits 10 degrees, and that moon actually opposes the sun, meaning that it's an Aquarius full moon at 8:58 a.m., and that's Pacific time. The Aquarius full moon at 11 degrees and 46 minutes of Aquarius opposing the Leo sun at 11 degrees, 46 minutes of Leo is power. Well, look, all full moons are powerful. They're culminations. But this particular full moon is very closely square to Uranus. Remember, the sun squared Uranus yesterday on August 2nd, and that could in itself be explosive. But now as the moon kind of comes through, whizzes through quite quickly, the full moon itself occurs at, like I said, just before 9 a.m. Seattle time, but just prior to that, just a couple of hours prior to that, that moon hits that square to Uranus. And again, this can be very, very shocking. Now, the reason why this is so important is that the full moon in Aquarius is about global perspective. It's about the community. It's about humanity. It's about the network of humans. It's about social media. It's not about me. It's about me as a node on a larger network, as a point of a complex net or network. And that moon in Aquarius is opposing the sun in Leo, which is saying the sun, the light, is shining on me. And so the polarity is this juxtaposition between here I am, but I'm really just a part of a greater whole. And into that, Uranus, which in modern astrology is the planet that's associated with Aquarius. In ancient astrology, it was Saturn. Saturn still holds sway in Aquarius. But the fact here is that the Uranus in Taurus, Uranus doesn't like being in Taurus because Taurus doesn't like to change. Taurus is stubborn. Taurus is bull-headed. And so when the sun squares Uranus on the 3rd and the full moon squares Uranus on the 4th, we might find ourselves in situations where something new happens. We have to adjust to it, and we really don't want to change, but tough. We have to. This is like a cosmic wake-up call. And then the other thing is that happens here is that by the following day, but we're already feeling it here, is that Mars at 19 degrees of Aries is squaring Jupiter at 19 degrees of Capricorn. We'll move this ahead to the 4th, and it's exact on the 4th. And in fact, this Mars squaring Jupiter, you remember earlier I said that the planets Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn will be opposed and squared, trined, and quincunxed by different planets in the same order. And we started out with the Mercury opposition to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And now we're coming into the fact that Mars, because it's moving slower, because it's slowing down to turn retrograde, even though it's not retrograde yet, Mars squares Jupiter on August 4th. Then Mars will square Pluto when it reaches 23 degrees of Aries, squaring Pluto at about 23 degrees of Capricorn on August 13th. And Mars will then square Saturn at 26 degrees of Capricorn from 26 degrees of Aries on August 24th. Now, what this really means is that the entire month of August has Saturn working on squares to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. And this is one of the underlying themes of the entire month that is maybe the most difficult part of the month, because Mars slowing down to turn retrograde, Mars is beginning to build energy. It's beginning, the angry red planet is getting angrier, redder, hotter. It will even pick up more when it turns retrograde in September. But the point here is that throughout the month, Mars is squaring the Capricorn planets. Remember, Mars is hot and fast. Capricorn is cold and calculating and slow. The odd thing is that Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Why? Because Mars in Aries can start a job and not finish it. It can start lots of jobs and not finish them. But in Capricorn, Mars gets staying power. Nevertheless, here we have Mars in Aries that's kind of at odds in a creative, stressful situation with first enthusiastic, expansive Jupiter. Again, this is the first of the 3 Mars squares. and this occurs on August 4th. This is about exuberance. This is about too much excitement. This is about, yes, I can, even if I can't. This is about taking on too much. This is about becoming overly committed. And this is the first Mars having to face the reality of Saturn, because Mars starts off being very, very enthusiastic and excited. By the middle of the month, we'll just zap ahead really quickly. And we're just following the Mars here. By August 13th, we can see that Mars is now squaring Pluto. And Mars square Pluto is a serious, nasty neighborhood. Why? Because Mars is about tools of war. Mars is sharp edges, razors, knives, guns. Mars is also surgical tools. Mars is precise in its cutting away that which doesn't need to be. Mars is the god of war. Mars is conflict, and conflict can have a very important purpose. However, here Mars is squaring Pluto, and if Mars is about the instantaneity of conflict in the moment, Pluto is about the simmering anger that turns to resentment that's way more dangerous than expressed anger on the surface. And so as Mars squares Pluto, we're seeing by the middle of the month, this is by August 13th, we're seeing some intense issues coming to the surface that we already know are there. But they won't play through here completely, but things are coming up, and things can be getting a bit nasty. By August 24th, we now have Mars at 26 Mars at 26 Aries, and Mars is squaring Saturn. Mars square Saturn can be frustrating because Mars is hitting the gas pedal and Saturn is hitting the brake. And so there's a conflict between how fast do we go, how hard do we push, how much do we assert, how much do we aggress, how much do we do how much anger, how much boundary, how forceful are we? Because in a way, the more forceful we are, the more the arm of Saturn, the wall of Saturn, the hand of authority, of government, of restriction, of laws come down on us. And so this is a bit of hot, cold, and it'll be very interesting to see how this Mars squaring one planet after another for the entire month, Jupiter, then Pluto, then Saturn, how this actually plays out. Because this is a theme that's being set up that's a larger theme, because remember, when Mars turns retrograde, it will play back through these energies, and it will make squares with these planets again, and then again as it moves forward. We'll get to that in October, November, December. But we're setting up here a conflict between the need for expression of true, what's the word I'm looking for? Intention in the moment. That's Mars in Aries. That's the clear spontaneity of the surgeon coming in and cutting what isn't needed, or making a cut in order to create a healing. But that is at conflict with Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in Capricorn, the sign of structure, the sign of status quo, the sign of government, the sign of economics and banks. And so we definitely see the battlefield here being laid out. So let's come back to August 4th, which is the Mars square Jupiter. But on August 4th, we also have Mercury moving into Leo. And this now, remember, Mercury is in Leo from August 4th until August 22nd. And Mercury in Leo wants to put on a show. People are going to say things that they weren't saying before. Mercury has been retrograde in Cancer, and people have had things on their mind, but they weren't ready to express it, even though the sun moved into Leo, a week ago or so, a week and a half ago. And there's a beginning of the things coming out in the open. It's not until Mercury comes into Leo that all of a sudden we begin expressing and giving, both in writing and in verbal expression, to those things which have been lurking beneath the surface. The other thing is on August 4th that Venus makes a quincunx with Saturn. Venus had earlier made quincunxes with Jupiter and Pluto the end of last month. the end of July. But now Venus makes its quincunx to Saturn. And again, here, this is about authority. This is about, I think we should be doing this. I would like it if this could happen. But Saturn is perhaps saying, no, it can't happen yet. Now, the interesting thing is that as Mercury moves into Leo, and it's moving toward a conjunction to the sun, as Mercury moving faster than the sun, almost twice as fast as the sun, will overtake the sun and then move ahead of it. And eventually it will turn retrograde again, but not for a couple months. But as we move ahead on August 7th, we're watching Venus here. Venus crosses over the north node, the lunar north node, the north node of the moon, which in some ways connects Venus with that higher purpose of life, with the connection of the soul's purpose. And Venus then slides from Gemini into Cancer. And Venus in Cancer is kind of an interesting deal, because, you know, we moderners tend to write Cancer off. We tend to say, oh, Cancer is recessive, it's passive, it's kind of holds energy, and it's reactive rather than expressive. Well, Venus in Cancer can be very tender. It can be very sweet. It can be very loving. But there's also a strong defensiveness when it comes to protecting loved ones, family, community, homeland. And so Venus in Cancer is an interesting deal, because when Venus moves into Cancer, she is going to spend, the rest of the month in Cancer. And so our likes, our attractions, our things that we want to do, which when Venus was in Gemini, retrograde and then direct again forever, we wanted to do this and then that. And it was okay if we were pulled in two different directions. And now we're kind of pulling in a bit and saying, what are my values? What's important to me? What do I value? And I may not be working these out loud and in front of people, although Mercury is in Leo, so I could be telling people. But the thing here is that I think that this is a deepening of exploration of the inner feelings that we have about our values, our morals, our ethics, what we like, what we don't like. And that begins around on August 7th. By August 9th, we have Mercury, remember, moving through Leo. And on August 9th, Mercury makes a trine to Chiron at 9 degrees of Aries. There we go. And here we get to talk about that which ails us. Here we get to teach that which might cure someone else. Mercury Mercury Chiron trine. I was trying to say Mercury trine Chiron all in one word. That would be Mercury trion. Mercury trine Chiron is about using language, using interaction, using conversation, expressing things out in the open, even if it is our vulnerability, even if it is revealing things that show that we might not have all the answers. I mean, Mercury in Leo likes to have all the answers, but that trine to Chiron, I think, is healing through sensitivity and vulnerability. By the following day, however, that Mercury moves from 9 degrees to 10 degrees, and now it makes a square to Uranus. This is on August 10th, the same day that the moon is joining Uranus. And here again, I think we see some surprises in people that are communicating, whether we say something that we hadn't said for a while or didn't mean to say, or whether someone says something to us that's shocking and we go, oh my God, I had no idea that this Mercury that is both squaring Uranus while the moon is conjuncting Uranus and squaring Mercury. This is a very powerful time of bringing things out into the open. Then let's move ahead to the 13th. And on the 13th, also we have here one other thing, is that backing up to the 10th, we have the sun moving through those quincunx points to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn that I said is going to be a continuing theme. And we have the sun doing it first, but it's going to be followed by Mercury. And there's also a quincunx here to Neptune on the other side. And so this is a bit of misalignment. This is a bit of energy that isn't working. And the quincunxes here, interestingly enough, are the Sun quincunxes Jupiter on August 10th. The Sun then quincunxes Neptune on the 12th. There it is right there. The Sun then moves on to quincunx Pluto on the 15th. There it is right there. And then the Sun will move on to quincunx Saturn on the 18th. We might as well move it ahead. We're right over there already. Now, let's back that up. And we have not only the Sun moving through those quincunxes, remember, quincunxes are adjustments. They're irritating. And so we now have the part of us with the Sun in Leo, soon to be followed by Mercury, making those same quincunxes that are just not, they're not working with the structures in which we're trying to express ourselves. And so this, again, is a bit of the no easy solution to the how we feel and what we're expressing in our hearts, and the restraints and the restrictions, whether they be quarantine pandemic restrictions, whether they be political restrictions, economic restrictions, whether they be family or restrictions of traditions or cultures. But there's something here that certainly is not working. Mercury, by the 14th, comes in and reaches the first of its quincunxes. There's Mercury right there on the 14th, and Mercury hits the quincunx to Jupiter. I'm not going to run these through right now, but Mercury quincunxes Jupiter and Neptune on the 14th, and then that Mercury will quincunx Pluto on the 16th, and Mercury will quincunx Saturn on the 18th. And so these Mercury quincunxes to these planets are in and around while the Sun is doing that too. But let's come back one quick moment here to the 13th, where we also have Mars making that square to Pluto. We talked about that earlier. This is a bit of a darker energy. This is someone being trigger happy. This can be violent. It doesn't have to be physically violent. It can be words that are violent, but there's confrontation, and it's out in the open, and it's like there can't be a winner when there are two people, neither of whom will allow themselves to be a loser. It's like even the winner ends up losing here unless there can be some way to compromise. Now, the good news is here, we do have a potential of compromise because we have the Sun and Mercury over the next few days moving faster than Mars. And so they are both moving into trine with Mars. In fact, the Sun reaches that trine to Mars on the 16th. There it is right there, is the Sun trine to Mars on the 16th. And then the Mercury trine Mars, because Mercury is moving very quickly, happens just a day later. Actually, they both happen on the 16th. They only happen a few hours apart because Mercury is catching up to the Sun, and that actually occurs on the 17th. Now, remember, when Mercury lines up with the Sun, it does this in two different ways. Because Mercury is between the Earth and the Sun, Mercury lines up with the Sun when it comes between the Earth and the Sun, but it also lines up with the Sun when it's on the far side of the Sun, going around the Sun. And so when Mercury lines up with the Sun between the Earth and the Sun, it's called an inferior conjunction, and that's when Mercury is retrograde. This is a superior conjunction where Mercury is distant from the Sun. It's outside of the containment of the orbit because it's on the other side of the Sun, but it's also invisible. It loses itself in the rays of the Sun, and so we can lose track of our language, of what's important. And yet, if we can find it, if we have trust and faith and know that it's in the underworld, it's in the hidden realm, that we can still grab onto it. And we have this ability to move that communication outward because Mercury is on the other side of the sun. That's on the 16th. We also whizzed here past on the 15th, Uranus turning retrograde. I don't need to back it up. I mentioned that at the beginning. This is the only planet that that has a station during the month, and Uranus turns retrograde on the 15th. And this, I always think that retrograde outer planets we don't notice as much, but they're homeopathic remedies. Like the more subtle they are, the more powerful or profound they can be. And I think here we're turning our revolutionary, unorthodox, rebellious energy inward so that it can build to coming to a crescendo rather than just spattering it and wasting the energy in the moment. And I think also this is the good news about the Mars squares to all those Capricorn points, because when Mars is moving through Aries, we can just waste the energy. We can get angry and blow the energy off and be done with it. But because Mars is making all these squares to the Capricorn planets, there's this sense of, if we can learn to hold in the anger of the urgency of expressing in the given moment, we can actually accomplish more than we'd ever imagined, because we're sustaining that Mars and we're going for the long haul. We're going for the long range gratification rather than the short-term gratification. So on the 16th, the Mercury and the Sun both trine Mars, and this is a very powerful, fiery expression in the moment, but this one works. Unfortunately, we're not quite done with the quincunx there, because the last of the quincunxes of both the Sun and Mercury have not quite reached the quincunx to Saturn, and they do that over the days ahead. There's Mercury and there's the Sun on the 17th and 18th. So that's very, very powerful, especially because on the 18th, we have the new moon in Leo. And the new moon in Leo is also incredibly potent. It's a bit more, I don't want to say annoying. It's harder to work with because it's so closely quincunx to that Saturn. You can see here that the new moon, the new moon actually occurs at 7:41 p.m. and that is Pacific Daylight Time. And the new moon in Leo occurs at 26 degrees and 35 minutes of Leo. Saturn is at 26 degrees and 38 minutes of Capricorn. This is exactly within 3 minutes of arc. That's 1/20th of a degree. Quincunx to Saturn, Saturn the authority, Saturn the tester, the taskmaster. Saturn is dad, whether we like to follow his rules or not. Saturn is the person in charge. And so here we get a little bit of disruption of that enthusiasm of the expression of the energy of Mercury and the Sun and now the moon all coming through and trining Mars. The energy is being expressed, whether it's on the streets or whether it's in the media or whether it's at home at the dinner table. Energy's coming out into the open. We're saying things, we're doing things. But Saturn still has its final say here. And its final say is not all that final, but it's enough to ruin the party. I mean, if we're having a party and we have this quincunx to Saturn, we may not get in trouble for breaking the rules and having a party while our parents are away, but Saturn comes home, dad comes home and says, party's over, you know, all the kids go home and we'll talk about it tomorrow or next week. It's not finality, but it definitely is a serious disruption, annoyance. And so this new moon has both the blessing of the communication and the expression and the flowering of the energy of the summer sun, of that Leo energy coming out into the open. And yet it also bumps into this wall that's not quite in front of us. The question is, can we run around the edge of the wall? Can we climb over it? It's a quincunx, you know, anything goes. We might be able to. On the 18th, we have Venus forming a sextile with retrograde Uranus. Venus is now moving faster than Uranus, which is actually moving backwards. And this is a bit of an intellectual, no, I don't want to say intellectual, it's Venus. It's a bit of a breakthrough in awareness. Again, I think this is coming back to our values. It's what we love. And here with Venus sextiling Uranus, we might be confronted with things that we didn't really even think that we would be attracted to, that all of a sudden have a high level of attraction. We might be attracted to things that are new or different. And this could be emotionally, it could be in relationship, but it also could be ideologically, it could be politically, it could be in some ways, this is something that comes to us that is like, wow, I never thought of that way. And that's intriguing. I'm not sure I'm in, but that is really interesting. And so I think that Venus-Uranus sextile is an openness to exploring things that we hadn't explored before. And so we're basically going from this irritating energy to, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe this can work out. On the 19th, we have Mercury leaving Leo and entering Virgo, and the moon actually on the 18th, actually also late on the 18th enters Virgo, and the sun is heading for Virgo. It has another couple days yet before it gets there. The movement of the planets on August 19th, first of the moon, then of Mercury, still on the 19th, and then the sun on the 22nd, there it is, the sun moving is into Virgo, is a shift from that which is out in the open, the midsummer, to the feeling that summer is still summer, but it's kind of passing us by, because Virgo is a mutable or changeable sign. Virgo is the sign from which the summer changes into the autumn. We're not there yet. It's still a whole month away. But right now we get, as Mercury first moves into Virgo and then the sun, we kind of get a, how do we make use of where we've been and what we have been going through so far? There's the new moon, there's the moon moving into Virgo, and there is Mercury. I wanted to back this up again because there's one other piece here, and that is that there's a fixed star that is a significant fixed star called Regulus, which is at 0 degrees of Virgo. And as a planet moves from Leo to Virgo, it lines up with Regulus, which is one of the Babylonian watchers. There are 4 stars that kind of were watchers, and Regulus is a royal star. And it's significant because the inhabitant of the White House, Donald Trump, has Regulus in his chart magnified, emphasized. And so with these planets moving from Leo into Virgo, they're going to come across Donald Trump's Mars and his ascendant. And how that plays out, we'll just have to see. I'm not guessing in advance, but I do think that there's a piece of all of this that's tied to that, as first Mercury moves there, and then over the following days, the sun by the 22nd also moves into Virgo. And Virgo being practical, Virgo being more about bringing things down to earth. Virgo is still mercurial, but unlike Gemini, which is up in the head, its ideas and its thinking, and it's fast, Virgo is more about earth. It's about practical. It's how do I make this idea or this thought useful? It's pragmatic. And so we're getting into now this whole shift of energies into earth. And part of why this is so important is that Mercury and the sun will both make trines to Uranus as the month moves on and as September begins to unfold. So the next important thing that occurs is that on the 24th, we have Mars making that square to Saturn. Remember, Mars made a square to Jupiter at the beginning of the month. Pluto made a square to Pluto in the middle of the month, and it's making a square to Saturn at the end of the month on the 24th. Let's get that exact. There we are right there. And that is that gas break, hot, cold, do it, don't do it. We have that same day, though, an interesting thing that is developing, although it doesn't come to fruition until another couple of days. And that is that the moon moving through watery Scorpio makes a trine to Neptune. And we have Venus moving through watery Cancer, moving toward a trine with Neptune. That's not exact until the 27th. But what this means is that we have a moving grand trine in water. So while we have this kind of hot, cold, angry, do it, don't do it, frustration, warring kind of conflictual Mars against Saturn, threatening with the structure and with the response. Into that, we have the emotions of that deep power of the passionate intensity of the Scorpio moon tied to vision, Neptune, and also tied to those values that we've been talking about all month with that Venus in Cancer. And if we follow that along, and we will in a moment, we can see that Venus will move to a trine to Neptune, which is very interesting and important. But Venus is also now moving into oppositions with all those Capricorn planets. It hits the opposition to Jupiter on the 25th, the same day that Mercury hits the trine to Uranus. This is, again, overdoing, overamping. This is about saying things that wasn't said before. This is about a ball game changer. Something happens that is like, wow, I didn't know that. New information comes out into the open. This is on the 25th. But again, it's right on the tail end of this frustration. Maybe this is a response to what we thought we could do and now we can't. And now the follow-up is, well, here's the truth. Here's what really happened. The same day, Venus makes that opposition to Jupiter. Too much, overspending, overindulgent. There's a lot going on here. And that Venus significantly is moving closer and closer to a trine to Neptune, which it reaches on August 27th. Now, Venus trine Neptune is a sweet, harmonious balance between love, that's Venus in Cancer, the what I value, the tender, sweet, attractive, pleasure-seeking side, and Neptune, the dreams, the fantasies, the illusions. Now, if you remember, we had Venus retrograding back forth in Gemini, and over a couple of months it made 3 squares to Neptune from May to July as Venus moved into Gemini and squared Neptune, retrograded back to the square to Neptune, and then went direct last month and squared that Neptune for the third and final time. This was all about misinformation. This was about fantasy overtaking reality. Well, this, the trine is more about fantasy as a motivating factor for using the idealism and the dreams and the positive use of imagination to actually lay down the scaffolding upon which we can build reality. I really like this trine on August 27th, especially because it's followed by a trine from Mercury, which in Virgo is now going to trine bing, 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 Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. Mercury trines Jupiter just as the moon is coming back around into Capricorn. And that moon coming back around into Capricorn, again, the end of the month, happens while Mercury is trining Jupiter. This is communication of big ideas, philosophy, thoughts, that Mercury then will also in the following days, but not technically until next month, that Mercury will then trine Pluto and Saturn. We'll talk more about this on the mid-month update. For those of you Patreoners who get the mid-month update, we'll zone in on this quite a bit more. But the month ends with a bit of intensity. There's an easy energy as Venus and Mercury form trines with Neptune and Jupiter. But then on the 30th of the month, we have Venus making that opposition to Pluto. Now, if you remember correctly, we opened the month with Mercury making an opposition to Pluto, and that was intense communication and power struggles and stuff coming out into the open that was hidden and people working secret agendas. Now with Venus there, we're ending the month with something very similar, and oddly enough, Mercury, which was opposed Pluto at the beginning of the month, is now opposing Neptune at the end of the month. So these two oppositions, the Venus opposing Pluto and the Mercury opposing Neptune, set up an ending game for the month where passions are involved, deep feelings are involved, and yet people are not being straight. What we're saying and what we're hearing might vary from what the actual truth is. You might say, well, isn't that just normal business these days? And maybe it is. But I think that the crescendo of the end of this month is that it's almost like we can throw our arms up in the air and say, I can't figure this out. I've lost control, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens as it settles out. The good news is it will settle down. It will settle out. And so I think, though, that as we get to the end of the month, we simply need to stay aware of the fact that we are capable of holding opposite points of view. Oftentimes, we have a set of information or facts that we know are true. And oftentimes, when confronted with something else, we have to make a judgment. This is true or that is true. And what I'm suggesting here is that one of the underlying lessons of the month of August is accepting multiple ideas as being true. We can have a preference, but it doesn't mean that one is right and the other is wrong. And I know that that's kind of complicated because often when we have oppositions, we favor one side of the planetary coin, if you will. Venus opposed Pluto, we might say, I'd rather stay in Venus. It's pretty and it's pleasant. I don't want to go to those dark places and all those conspiracy theories and all those things that people are saying that I don't want to believe. Or the Mercury opposing Neptune, there I might want to stay in my fantasy and I don't want to deal with the Mercury in Virgo, which is telling me the truth. We have to temporarily suspend belief. It's like when we go to a movie. We don't necessarily see, scene by scene of a movie judging, well, that can't happen. That's not true. And what I'm suggesting here is that by the end of the month, we have to allow ourselves the space to say, it doesn't matter whether something is true or not. Now, I'm not saying this in the long run. I'm saying this for a few days. We need to open up our minds. We need to stretch our minds so we do not deny, avoid, suppress, repress one side of this opposition, this tension that's pulling us and that's pulling the country, that's pulling the planet, that's pulling relationships out of whack to these extremes. And when we end the month with this Venus opposed Pluto, we start it with Mercury opposed Pluto, and we end it with Mercury opposed Neptune. We have to accept, or I shouldn't say we have to, it's healthy to accept the idea that we can hold opposite ideas in our mind at the same time without putting one into invisibility. Because as soon as we do that, we give it power by projecting it, and it will then appear in the environment as our nemesis, as our opponent, as the antithesis of whatever our beliefs are. So here's the call for the month. Move through the month with an open mind, as I always suggest. Hold on to what those things are that you believe true. But when confronted with opposites, don't necessarily immediately try to go to war in order to prove that you're correct. You may be correct. That's not the issue. The issue is, how are you going to make the most out of what your assertions are, out of what your certainties are, out of what your beliefs are? Because if you express everything that you have every time you have it, you may win battle after battle after battle, but be so exhausted that Pluto ends up winning the war. There's too much at stake, individually, culturally, globally, for us to get lazy now. And one of the things that we can do as we get lazy is we don't put up our guard, our boundaries, and instead we take on every issue as an ultimate battle. We need to choose our battles carefully. This is an underlying lesson of Mars square Pluto, which is exact on August 13th, but it's in play all month. Choose battles wisely. It's more important now to win the war than it is to win each battle day by day, week by week, and even month by month. There's a larger agenda being played out. As long as these outer planets are still retrograde, it'll still take a while for us to put 2020 into perspective. It may take years, decades, even centuries to understand the importance of these days that we are living through right now. The old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, is really only half a curse. It is not easy living in times like these, but it also is a blessing to be alive at a point when humanity is actually being forced to review, reconsider, and rebirth itself into something that may be around for millennia to come. I'm Rick Levine. Think cosmically, but always act locally.